We're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and seek the truth with FBI whistleblower and common sense extremist, Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast. It's Wednesday, April 1st. Welcome to April Fool's Day 2026. And today we're going to talk about how the Department of Homeland Security is very mega Doppler concerned about its public image and getting along with the media. Meanwhile, its mission seems to sort of be working, but I don't know. We'll have to get into the details. Also, Democrats want to ban gambling. There is further proof that the TSA is completely and wholly unnecessary to your life. NPR is preoccupied with rural America and marine life. And finally, the courts continue to erode our constitutional protections, particularly the Fourth Amendment. So let's get after it. My purposes today are sort of to reorient our focus. I know that you can kind of tend to be a little bit repetitive, redundant with pointing out obvious, massive problems, but that doesn't make them any less important or less massive. I've heard things like we're rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. Today, fiddling while Rome burns. Majoring in the minors, all these sorts of little idioms to say you're being distracted because you're kind of being entertained at the same time by the soap opera, the professional wrestling that is American politics as it exists today. And you're taking your eye off of the prize. You're being distracted by the laser pointer. Further idioms there. There are some major, massive problems that impact your life every single day. And we're just not talking about them. I guess because we've seen this episode before. But I'm sorry, not your mama's show. It's your daddy's show. Hamburger meat costs $6.75 a pound. That's a massive problem. Gasoline costs $4 a gallon. I drive a Camry and it costs me $50 to fill up so I can drive my kids to school. The average car payment is almost $1,000 in this country. I thought this was supposed to be the golden age. I thought we were so back and we're so based. Well, final point on this, reading levels are at 7th grade. Maybe that's why people are easily distracted. We have massive problems. Rome is on fire, and yet we focus on things that are not really necessary, or if they are, they're kind of a molehill rather than a mountain. So let's talk about some of those issues today. It's kind of all across the board, as it is wont to do on a Wednesday. But let's get into this one I saw from the New York Times. At one point, a newspaper. Headline: New Homeland Security Chief wants deportations, but without the backlash. This is all about Mark Wayne Mullen, the new Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. Here's a quote from his confirmation hearing. My goal in 6 months is that we're not in the lead story every single day. And the New York Times is quick to point out that at the same time that ICE officials were publicly discussed targeting serious criminals through a sophisticated method, Americans would see images of immigrants, i.e. illegal aliens, running from agents at Home Depots and car washes, and hear stories of citizens and legal status holders caught up in the dragnet. What is the massive problem? The massive problem, there are a few, is that we have somewhere between 30 and 50 million illegal aliens in the country right now. A lot of our problems are downstream of that itself. Well, why do we have them in the country? Because our government ignored the social compact that it has with its citizens. One of the few charges that we expect and demand of our government in return for giving up a little bit of our liberty is that they would defend the border and maintain our sovereignty as a nation. And if anybody slipped through the cracks, they would be ejected from our country. And that has not been fulfilled by Republicans and by Democrats. And as a result of 50 million people in the country who shouldn't be in the country, you're seeing the economic consequences of it. People can't get jobs. There's a housing shortage. There's all these other massive problems. But really, If the government could focus in on one of its few charges, it would solve a lot of those problems. Secondly, you kind of get into it with the New York Times. They're saying, well, you promised us you would only focus on the worst offenders, the most violent criminals. No, no. Every one of those 30 to 50 million illegal aliens has violated our laws. They all got to go. And if you go just in a concentrated fashion because you really are worried about your public image, then you're never going to achieve the mission. And let me add this. Is the Trump administration just reenacting Mean Girls, the movie? That's really what they're doing. Your concern is about your public image with the New York Times. The New York Times had these stories pre-written as soon as Donald Trump was reelected president. We knew these stories were going to come out. The very sympathetic abuela who's missing her leg because of diabetes, and Obamacare just didn't go far enough with its welfare for illegal aliens. So now her great, great, great granddaughter has to work 3 jobs under the table to pay for her insulin. And don't you feel bad for her? Shouldn't she have free health care and welfare bennies on top of being allowed to remain in the country even though she's an illegal alien? No, they all have to go. Mean Girls. Trump administration, you have successfully wooed away the it guy, the really popular dude that all the girls have a crush on. You successfully wooed them away from the mean girl based on your own personality. That's what happened in the election of 2024. The voters were the it kid, and they chose you. And instead of just leaning in to what the it kid wanted and liked about you, you have now tried to become a mean girl yourself and tried to mimic what the likes of the New York Times want. So you're trying to be more like the mean girls, try to get her friends like the New York Times and the Washington Post. It's utterly retarded. You're never going to win the New York Times' approval. You're never going to win their readers' approval. Embrace what you are. You won. You won the election because the American people voted for what you promised them. You don't have to duplicate what the Mean Girls were about. It is working, and you're not even doing that good of a job of it. You want some proof? Let's go over to another one of the friends of the Mean Girls, the Washington Post, because democracy dies in darkness. Proof that it kind of is working, and I don't know why Mark Mullen is worried about bad PR. That's going to come at him no matter what. Headline: legal immigration to the United States is falling from most countries under the Trump administration. So just a couple of figures about legal immigration, not illegal aliens. But at the same time, I think a lot of people were kind of saying, you know what? We're pretty full. We can focus on Americans first, not other people from other countries. So the U.S. issued about 250,000 fewer visas in the first 8 months of last year compared to the last year of the Biden administration. 11% fewer permanent resident and temporary visas, 200,000 fewer business and tourism visas. Visas issued in international students fell by more than 30%. And that was because of the Trump travel ban, which paused a bunch of student visa interviews. And they wound up pulling away some State Department employees saying that we just can't focus on that anymore. And then a quote from somebody who the Washington Post, because democracy dies in darkness, sought out because they want the Trump administration to make itself more like the Mean Girls. Quote, there's no policy more important to the present and future of the U.S. economy than immigration, said Harvard University professor Jason Furman, who served as a top economist during the Obama administration. Furthermore, he said, quote, when we restrict immigration, we don't just shortchange labor force growth today. We also reduce innovation and productivity growth in the future. Let me translate that from nerd speak, from communist nerd speak. He is, after all, a Harvard professor who worked under the Obama administration as an economist. An economist, when they brought in the Keynesian economics, and they said that you can just spend money forever and blow out the budget. And I guess the Trump administration said, hold my beer, we'll do worse. But this dude said that the greatest key to our success as an economy is just letting in a whole bunch of illegal aliens to pick the cotton. That's what we need them for, right? What sort of innovation do the Nicaraguans bring to the American continent? None at all. It's just a bunch of chattel labor that we've flooded into our country. And then also, they help on the consumption side because they got to spend that money that they earned under the table. That's how the likes of this professor from Harvard view the economy. Because we can't have an economy in this country that is targeted towards the American people. Those hordes that came across by the tens of millions that are taking jobs from Americans, taking houses from Americans. They're clogging up all of our communities that are not built to sustain 30, 40, 50 million extra people. The downstream consequences of it. Hey, what about the parking spaces? We didn't build a community out for that. What about the plumbing? There's a whole bunch of people that are extra living here that gotta poop. We don't have the infrastructure for the schools that are completely just flooded with extra students who don't even speak English. Now you got to hire a bunch of extra teachers and translators to accommodate it. All of these big, giant problems. And all you have to do is follow through on the mandate that the American people sent when they elected the Trump administration in 2024 and follow through on the actual social compact, the promise that we have, the agreement between the American people and its government. And we demand ejection of 10, 20, 50 million illegal aliens. And you haven't followed through on it because you're the mean girls, because you want the Washington Post and the New York Times to stop reporting about you when they already have the stories written. You're never going to win their approval. Just kick the dust off your sandals and move on. Okay, let's pivot over to something different. We covered down on the futures betting last week a bit, and how there's these poly markets, and you can go online and bet on not bet, they say invest, or I don't know what the term du jour is, but essentially you can predict and put your money on everything. Could be who's going to win a Grammy Award. Is the movie that's coming out this Friday going to break some sort of records at the box office? Is the United States going to engage in a kinetic action in the Middle East? Definitely not a war. How dare you call me a stewardess? I'm a flight progress coordinator. All these different things. Well, now the Democrats and some Republicans are starting to weigh in on that. It's caught their radar because it's on your radar when you're not focusing in on the price of hamburger meat when you buy yellow tag beef at Walmart. So there's been a proposition. There's actually been multiple proposed bills put forward, the most recent of which comes from some Democrat lawmakers, and they want to ban futures betting or predictions. So it's Democrat legislation to ban gambling on elections, war, government, and sports. This comes from Senator Jeff Merkley from Oregon, and also Elizabeth Warren from Massachusetts, and Representative Jamie Raskin from Maryland, leading the Stop Corrupt Bets Act. Legislation bans prediction markets on all those aforementioned items, and sports being sort of a head scratcher because that's a massive industry that I thought we approved as a country. Also, you have Senator Adam Schiff from California and John Curtis, a Republican from Utah, teamed up with a measure to ban sports prediction market contracts, which they say is tantamount to gambling and goes virtually unregulated. Now, the side story there is that those guys are being lobbied because there's sports gambling that the FanDuels and all those other online betting, they want you to spend your money with them and lose your money to them. And they're registered with the government. They're playing really nice with the government. And I'm sure contributing quite handsomely to the re-election coffers of our politicians. And they're saying, if you go to Poly Market and bet on that, that's going to be money we should have had. So, Senator, could you push forward some legislation and say that it's actually to stop the insider trading that's going on? We're going to ban that. So, hardly being a benign and innocent thing, really truly interested in the American people's best interests, right? Your general welfare. But what does it actually come down to? Because this is an issue that is in the news and quasi of public interest, particularly when it deals with corruption. So, how would you actually solve the problem? And what is the problem? Well, the problem is that there are people with insider knowledge who are actually gaining quite handsomely from it. The problem is not the people that are out there just flooding onto Polymarket and saying, I don't know, maybe a warhead will be dropped on Pakistan sometime in mid-April. I see that I can get 100 to 1 odds on that one. I'll throw down $5. No, that's not really the issue. The issues are when a whole bunch of people are playing those markets, and then that information gets ingested into our media, and that's gleaned as some sort of indicator of actual truth. And that's really an indictment of our media, and the media doesn't want you to see that. And similarly, the insider knowledge, the insider trading that is allowed to go on. So how would you correct that? I mean, would you hold anybody accountable if somebody was working in the Trump administration and had insight into the kinetic operations happening in Iran and went on to Polymarket either themselves or through some sort of third party carve out and saying, hint, hint, hey, can you throw down a nice couple thousand for me? Because I'd like to profit from this. That needs to be rooted out. I don't care who's in charge. I don't care about what happened under the Biden administration and if any of this went on there and the corruption. And that was very well documented on this program and others. I am a process person. I am a truth person. I am a man without a country, apparently, because if I see corruption and I call it out, that just makes a lot of people very uncomfortable if it happened to be the person who they pulled a lever for. But again, not your mama's show. It's your daddy's show. I want to see government gangsters in prison. I don't care what political party they're from. I don't care which administration they were part of. If you use your position that you were either elected to or appointed to because you express fealty to the individual who was willing to appoint you to that position, if you manipulated your way in there, I don't care about the route up the mountain. You got to the top of the mountain, and your action up there, instead of looking at the opportunity, the golden opportunity in this golden economy that we have where hamburger meat costs $6.75, as in you looked at that opportunity instead of the chance to serve the country, a chance to go to the amusement park, enjoy the ride, but clean up a little bit of trash before you left. And you didn't spend decades there. You just spent the necessary amount of time to do the job. And instead, you lined your pocket like Aaron Burr. You didn't say, hey, the American people are my customers. I'm duty bound to protect them against fraud and force and to do a very finite amount of duties that they need me to do in the limited amount of time that I have to do here. I'm going to meet that expectation. And if I can't, I'm going to explain why. I'm going to move the ball as far forward as I possibly can. If you don't do that and you instead profit, then you go to jail. You go to the end of an L-shaped hallway in solitary confinement for the rest of your life. That's the way that it should work. High stakes. High stakes. If you pick up your hand and you swear that oath and you don't take it seriously, then you go to jail. But how would we rectify that? I mean, would we lean on a robust, well-funded, experienced professional law enforcement agency to perhaps pursue a public corruption investigation of any of the evildoers? No, no. You know what we need to do? The same thing that every government agency does whenever they get their hands caught in the cookie jar. We just need more training, guys, more training. So from NBC News, senators urge the Trump administration to boost ethics training on insider trading. Over 40 Democrats in the House and the Senate signed a letter, a strongly worded letter, I hope. And the letter was addressed to top administrative regulators and ethics officials on Monday, asking for government-wide trading on insider trading in prediction markets. Senator Elizabeth Warren was at the helm of that one. So, they can hire some outside third party, maybe use some of the money that the government stole, tax from you, in order to hire an ethics professional, an expert to come in and tell them, hey, stop stealing from the American people. I'm sure that'll go really far. All right. Let's talk about some stuff that is actually impacting people's lives, those who have the extra coin to travel, and the corruption that's kind of gone under the radar when the people who are elected to office are too busy going on to Polymarket to make sure that they can line their pockets with their insider knowledge, or the other sorts that take their policy making and regulation knowledge and take that over to the stock market, wherever their choice is, wherever their poison is. Why don't they take up this concern where the airlines are ripping off customers and putting them on buses? So this comes from the Washington Post. Headline: Airlines surprise passengers with flights in air quotes, that are actually buses. And this deals with this company called the Landline Company. They're operating bus flights on behalf of American Airlines, and they've been doing it for over 3 years. So from the piece, let me just get to where I want to go. Yeah, the individual they want to kind of hone in on this. All these news outlets do the same thing. They got to find the one case, the most sympathetic case, like Abuela, who's missing her leg because she's got diabetes. Kennedy Woodard Jones. She's got a hyphenated name because she's a girl boss, but we'll call her Kennedy Woodard because the patriarchy always wins. She checked in for her flight home from a work trip 24 hours in advance earlier this month. Her emailed reminder from American Airlines referenced her flight from Chicago O'Hare, which she had chosen a seat. She went through the Transportation Security Administration, TSA, and she went to the checkpoint. They made sure they fondled her, and they made sure that her shampoo wasn't too big, whatever they had to do through policy. And then Woodard, who's lined up at the gate in South Bend, Indiana, Northern Indiana, home place of my alma mater, Our Lady's University, the Notre Dame du Lac. And it's like a 90-mile travel, so it's like a 15-minute flight. And that's when things got confusing for Miss Woodard. A bus sat outside. She thought the bus was going to take her to the plane, but instead it was just a bus that drove her from South Bend, Indiana to Chicago, the O'Hare Airport. So travelers book the bus ride, which gets billed as a flight. Now, there's very, very, very fine print, according to the Washington Post. So the American Airlines Corporation gets around any sort of allegation of false advertising. So travelers book this bus ride. It looks just like a flight. American's website notes that the route is, quote, operated by the Landline Company as American Eagle. American Eagle is a plane and, quote, includes travel on a luxury bus and shows a bus icon during the booking. But some people who are using these third-party booking websites like the Orbits of the world, Travelocities, they might overlook that. Yeah, you think, because you go to the book a flight option and you click on it and you spend the money expecting a 12-minute flight, and instead you get 90 to 120 minutes in a luxury bus. I'm sure that's very pleasant for all those people. The Washington Post actually tried to make this look like a great, fun experience. I guess just further indicator that you don't need to appease the mean girls. They are trying to argue that buses are superior, or at least on par with air travel. But I kind of queued that up because that's sort of an interesting story. But I want to talk about the big problem. They mentioned that Miss Woodard went through TSA, Transportation Security Administration. That's the big boondoggle where people in blue shirts fondle the passengers and try to grab on to their shampoo or their hair gel. It used to be like, hey, what's in your shoes? He goes, you probably have a stick of dynamite in there. Just the cosplay that is security, when really the TSA essentially exists just to take millions of dollars and send it to private security companies so they can buy the body scan devices that they pinky swear, promise, cross my heart, hope to die, stick a needle in my eye, that they don't retain the images of your naked body. Meanwhile, they do, and then they laugh at it behind your back. TSA, it's not been around for that long. I mean, George Washington was not at the helm when they invented TSA. It's not in the invisible ink in the good and plenty clause in the back of the Declaration of Independence. TSA is an outgrowth of September 11th, when we had to worry about national security. Forever. You used to be able to meet your family member as they deboarded the aircraft and give them a hug, give them a bouquet of flowers, welcome them. But now, no, sorry, you got to have a ticket and get through these guys who allow like 95% of the actual red teams through. The guys that are trying to sneak through bomb-making material or weapons, they don't get caught. They're completely useless. And actually, they're a net negative because they create a choke point for somebody with an S-vest to detonate it in a crowd of thousands of people. But did you know that you don't have to have it at an airport? So here's a piece from the New York Times, at one point, a newspaper, and they see a different problem than what we see here, AMRADs. Headline: these airports don't use TSA. Your current wait time is minutes, not hours. Wow, tip me over with a feather. The private market actually works. A couple of different locations. San Francisco, they have 2 million flyers in the last 30 days. Average peak time wait, 10 minutes. Kansas City, under 10 minutes. Sarasota, Florida, in the land of milk and honey, nearly 300,000 passengers in the last month. The average wait time through standard security was 3 minutes. If you do the pre-check lane where you hand over all of your private data to the Transportation Security Administration, it's less than 2. So good luck with handing over all of your information to gain 60 seconds in line. Private security contractors receive the exact same training as TSA agents, and they've continued to receive their salaries during the shutdown. And that's the problem for the New York Times. Here is actually the notice that comes from the Department of Homeland Security. It's called the Screening Partnership Program, and various institutions can apply for it. And if you scroll through, you see all of these airports. If you happen to be watching us here on Rumble, YouTube, or later on Spotify, everything at AmRadPod, you see the different airports that are available, the different private security companies who are involved with this. And the overall program has been enormously successful because the wait times are down, because customer service actually matters. The airport won't hire your security company if you're taking hours to process the people through. And the people who are doing it are not only getting the TSA training, they're getting additional training. They wound up catching way, way more of the red team stuff than the government employees because good enough for government work, right? Rome is burning. Department of Homeland Security dealing with this temporary government shutdown right now, right? The sob stories about people having to wait for hours online. The additional sob stories about the government workers who don't do a good job at all, having to go without for 2 paychecks when they know they're going to get all of their back pay. And if they need to go to a credit union and present their credentials and say, I work for Uncle Sam, can you give me an interest-free loan? Most credit unions would actually do it. So spare me the sob stories. The giant problem. Rome is on fire. We are hemorrhaging money. The government cannot steal, I mean tax, enough money to stay afloat. So it's going to print more money, which is going to cause all the dollars in your bank account to become worth less and worth less until they become worthless through this thing we call inflation that leads to $7 per pound hamburger meat or $4 gas. I mean, some of it's derivative of the kinetic operations, definitely not a war overseas, but a lot of it is derivative of the out of control spending that your government has done to you for decades at this point. And we're worried about refunding an entity that essentially is not necessary to the process. Why isn't TSA RIP? Private security can handle everything. Do you think that the little airport strip that has 2 gates in South Bend, Indiana, is really depending on TSA? The airport that is so small that they can justify to the passengers, "Hey, we're actually gonna put you on a bus when we take you to Chicago," and that's legal? That's not something that they're getting complaints about, other than just one little story that's very sympathetic to their needs in the Washington Post? The problem is this is a golden opportunity for the Trump administration. If they can get off their butts and stop worrying about being a mean girl and being more like the chick that the dude left you for, they could just say, look, America, you don't need it. In fact, we're going to refund all of this money to you, the taxpayer. Or we can't do that. Maybe we'll just route it through block grants to these localities so that they can see fit to pursue the right way to go about security because our TSA sucks. There's long lines and they let through the bad guys consistently. But they're not doing that. Why not? Because they're distracted with other things that don't matter, like impressing the New York Times with making sure that they don't publish quite as many news stories about how ICE, while they're deporting illegal aliens, is doing it the wrong way. They should be focusing on more murderers rather than people who are just stealing jobs from Americans. Further proof that the media is never going to come across to your side comes from NPR. Headline: Trump administration turned rural towns into sitting ducks for disasters because the Trump administration is led by a guy who's mean, orange, and literally Hitler, you can see that the media spin here is trying to pull away part of the coalition. That the gigantic tent that I don't really think has very many tent poles in it, so it's kind of a tarp at this point. But the coalition that elected the Trump administration, part due, was heavily rural. The it kid was rural in part. And NPR is trying to write a story here why these people should break away from supporting the current administration. And it's all about government funding. So they lean on their example is this town called Duria, Pennsylvania. So since the 70s, there's been this tall levee that's protected the town of Duria, town of 5,000 people, from floodwaters. But the river gets higher than it used to, changes due to development because as you put down more concrete, more water just runs off into the river rather than into the soil. And also climate change because we got to make sure we talk about acid rain and the hole in the ozone layer being the fault of the president because apparently he's mean, orange, and literally Hitler. But what's the point? And what's the point that I want to make today? Rome is on fire. They talk about floods that happened in 2011 and 2014. That's not even in the last decade. So this has been going on, well, say it themselves, since the 1970s. This is not a long-standing, not a recent problem. This is a long-standing issue. And yet, the key point, there's been applications here from this Duria, Pennsylvania, for $11 million in federal funds. That's funds that come from Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam doesn't earn money. It's not a business. All it can do is steal, tax money from you or print it out of thin air. So we're redistributing wealth to rural areas. And this is perceived as something that's objectively good. This is what the government should be doing, taking money from you and giving it somewhere else, from each according to his ability to each according to his needs, because of the climate change. We have to. Now, the Trump administration, part one, actually launched this initiative called the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities, BRIC, because it's a fun government acronym. It was very extremely MAGA Doppler popular. Yeah, because it's government giving you free money, or at least free to you. Stealing, taxing money from others and giving it to you, redistributing wealth. And wouldn't you know, the Biden administration continued it because the Biden auto pen administration was incredibly communist. They're all down for redistributing wealth. And now that Trump has come back in and he's even more mean, orange, and literally Hitler than he was back in 2018 when the BRIC initiative was started, they stopped it. And one of the reasons they're really stopping it is because this has been a gigantic slush fund for climate change. And the Trump administration is not opposed to spending a bunch of money. They just don't want it to be for the ozone hole or the acid rain because the voters who sent Trump back to office don't like that. So they're kind of pushing pause. And this has created a giant problem for these small rural towns that apparently didn't know that flooding was happening, even though it's happened for the last 50 years. What's the big problem? Everybody is just at the teat of the government. You're a small town. You were built on a river and you haven't realized that flooding happens. That's called a you problem. There used to be presidents that stood up there. There used to be Democrat presidents that said, yeah, that's not a federal problem. We're really sorry. We hope that you're able to manage this issue at a local level. We're sorry you only have 5,000 people and an $11 million problem. It's not a new problem. Maybe you'll find a way. Maybe this town just shouldn't exist. And that sounds really horrible to say. If you live in this town in Pennsylvania, I feel bad, but your town floods. How can I, in good conscience, criticize people who build houses on the beach in hurricane time and demand government-provided home insurance? No, hurricanes happen. You're going to have to own it yourself. Similarly, floods happen on rivers all the time. So deal with the problem. Figure out a way. Figure out a way through a private entity or source, or just move a little further from the river. I know that's callous, but that's a reality. And this isn't even a new problem. But for you to say, hey, I made a mistake and put my home on the ocean where there's going to be hurricanes, you need to bail me out, is no different than you saying, oh, I'm in a rural town and I voted for your boy, so he owes me an $11 million levy. So pony up. That's how we're in the problem to begin with. All right. I've got a couple more that I want to churn out here on the subject of some big issues, and we're focusing in, we're majoring in the minors and showing how the mean girl administration is just never going to win the approval of the media out there. This also comes from NPR. The US could exempt, they actually did. This is a little bit old. It's a couple days old. They have followed through on this one. So, headline breaking. We've actually done this thing. The US exempted the oil industry from protecting Gulf animals for national security. And this is a hit piece from NPR, but there's been others like it because as they characterize him, the defense secretary, he's a secretary of war. Further proof that the media will never approve you, mean girls. Pete Hegseth cited reasons of national security, triggering a meeting this week that could exempt oil and gas industry in the Gulf of Mexico. Again, it's called the Gulf of America. You're never going to win them over, Trump administration. From requirements of the Endangered Species Act, a move that could lift protections for endangered whales, turtles, and other animals. Gasoline costs $4. A lot of it's because of inflation. A lot of it is because of the goings on in the Middle East. And we're going to talk about the whales. Majoring in the minors. Here's a major one. And this deals with some seafaring matters, so we can kind of transition, as we're wont to do on the American Radicals podcast. This piece comes from Reason. Headline, Maine lobsterman asks the Supreme Court to strike down a rule allowing the government to track his boat 24/7. So this is a rule, not a law, but it's a rule because of the Administrative Procedures Act from 1946, where our Congress gave over its ability to legislate. That's how this works. They said, passing laws is really, really hard. We just want to get reelected and not held accountable for bad laws. We will just vote away our ability to legislate to the executive branch. I know you're supposed to have co-equal branches of government, but that's too much for us. Can you just kick in a few bucks to my campaign? And I promise I'll push back on things, but really just kind of sit here. So there was a rule passed in 2022, and it related to these East Coast cities. And they said, if you're in a seagoing vessel, you must install a GPS device because we're the government and we need to know where you are at all times. It required lobstermen to install the GPS devices. It tracked and sent their location all day long, not like one time a day. It was all minute by minute. And even when you docked your boat, it had to be kicking back data to the government. Now, failing to comply could be, we're going to take your fishing license, we're going to fine you, we might put you in jail. It was pitched as a way to actually, it'll be good for you. You won't have to write down in print where you've been anymore. We'll just record it for you and we'll just give you that information. Isn't everything convenient? Just give us all of your data and you'll be happy. And also, it's going to reduce the environmental impact because while we're monitoring where you're going and it becomes publicly available, we'll be able to save all the lobsters from overfishing. Newsflash, lobstermen make money by fishing for lobsters. If they overfish an area, they won't make any money in the future. If the lobsters become an endangered species or an extinct species, like the whales that the NPR was really worried about, then they don't have a job. So it's actually in their interest to be conservationists, to be good stewards of that area. So this guy, his name is Frank Thompson, he challenged the rule. He said, one, I've been fishing this area for 60 years. So I have a lot of institutional knowledge, subject matter expertise. If I have to hand that over and then everybody can see it, they're going to know where all the good areas are. So this is actually a competitive advantage for me that now I have to sacrifice. That's bad for business. But more importantly, it impedes on my Fourth Amendment right against illegal search and seizure. It's a privacy matter for me. And he sued. And the government ruled against him. Well, the courts ruled against him. They said that lobster fishing is a closely regulated industry, ergo, privacy protections don't exist. What? We're not talking about like a landfill that could have toxic material in it, and that could be a giant risk to the public safety. That's really what closely regulated industry is. It has to be gigantic risk to the public safety, and I'm not even really comfortable with that. But I'm kind of outvoted on it. I have to live in this world. We don't live in an anarchy. I understand. I'm like 3 dudes away from it. So there are some areas where there is additional government regulation, but it basically should be like a mine, right? Like if a mine collapses, okay, that could be a giant risk. But you know what else is on the list? Gun sellers, liquor sales. Oh, well, we don't want the kids to be boozing it up. And we've passed laws in this country that says the Second Amendment's dead. So gun sellers, they're going to be a closely regulated industry. Steve, there could be straw purchases going on. We don't want those guns traveling out there and illegally by the bad doers. Okay. But because of the slow creep of your government, which consistently erodes away, like the beaches were told being eroded away, let me just list off, and I actually did a little bit of research on what constitutes what do they call a closely regulated industry. This comes from the Institute for Justice, and it's all about warrantless inspections. What it means is the government doesn't need a warrant to come in and inspect you if you're a closely regulated business. They can just come on in and demand your papers. So where does this go? It's not just mines and landfills. It is now including barbershops, daycares, funeral homes, nursing homes, insurance companies, dog breeders, gas stations, and cigarette sellers. Oh, so they don't need a warrant to come in and search your business? When would that ever rear its ugly head? Oh, I know. When you were told to stay home and stay safe and shut down your non-essential barber shop, the one that you use to feed your family and pay your mortgage. The government can just come in there and search and say, are you open right now? We told you to shut it down. This is a massive, massive mountain. It's not a molehill. But we're too worried about other things, right? Like making sure that NPR, the New York Times, writes nice pieces about you when you're only focusing in on the worst deportations. Okay, that's going to do it for us today, but I got a fun palate cleanse here on the American Radicals podcast. If you're distracted, you're not really paying attention. Did you know that you could own something that is worth millions of dollars and it's just sitting on your face? Well, maybe pay a little bit of attention on that one.
What is that thing you're wearing? Let me see, that's something new. I never saw this before.
This?
Yeah.
It's an earring.
Earring what? Ruby?
No, it's a red diamond. Would you like to see it?
Oh my God. Do you know I just got news? I was looking for a red diamond for a client. It's round.
Yes.
Guys, you don't understand. This thing right now, do you know how much this is worth?
I have an idea.
There's no more red diamonds in the world. So, I was going to buy one for my client, a square one, 1 carat, $5 million. So this is round, must be worth more. So this is like $6 million.
Million
yeah, a round. There's no round. Round is very, very rare.
I didn't pay
color.
anything like that for it.
You bought it years ago.
I did.
But this, my friend, you better have it insured. So $6 million. This is.
I'm never going to wear it again.
No,
it's going back in the bank. And
nobody. You need guard. You. This is worth more than all my watches here.
$6 million hanging in that guy's ear in a very effeminate fashion. Well, at least he took it out and put it in the bank, which is a regulated industry. I'm sure the government won't go in there and seize it at any point because of a shortage of red diamonds. All right, guys, that's it for us today on the American Radicals podcast. Appreciate you as always. We'll plan to be back with you tomorrow, noontime on YouTube and Rumble, and always check us out on Spotify at AmRadPod. Until then, have a great day.
You've been listening to the American Radicals podcast. Find us on YouTube, Rumble, and X at AmRadPod.